Research experiments have been devised to test theories and hypotheses that eventually create new findings within varying sectors of psychology. Notable studies, such as the Asch Conformity study, are used to create a foundational base for the core fundamental ideas within the field of psychology.
Solomon Asch, the psychologist who organized the Asch Conformity experiment, was born in Poland but later traveled to America to receive an education. After receiving his PhD from Columbia University in 1932, he began to work with social psychologists at Swarthmore College. During his time there, he learned about the conformity study that was conducted by Mozagar Sharif and found error within the experiment.
In Sharif's conformity study, human subjects were put in a dark room and told to watch a diode of light and observe how much it moved. Without light, the human eye is unable to properly perceive images because the darkness does not give any frame of reference for movement. Therefore, the dot of light was not actually moving, but instead was an optical illusion. Asch believed that the study was flawed because there was no correct answer to compare the test subjects' responses to, since there was no realistic movement.
Solomon Asch pointed out that conformity could not be tested if there was no right answer, because it would be unclear that a particular response would be due to the group pressure. Because of the flawed conformity experiment, Asch was inspired to run his own research study in the 1950s at Swarthmore College.
In the Asch conformity experiment, Solomon planned to find how a person's personal opinions are influenced by those of a group while using a similar experimental method to that of Sharif, but instead using operational definitions to avoid study flaws. Conformity refers to an individual's tendency to abide by their answers or to be affected by the responses of another individual or group. Asch sought to figure out if people could ignore reality and give an answer they knew was wrong to conform to the rest of the group. He hypothesized that people would be more likely to conform because of peer pressure and the fear of being ostracized. To test the degree to which people follow or rebel against social norms, Solomon Asch organized his experiment to further analyze how psychology is associated with conformity. 3 lines of varying sizes were presented to the group, lines A, B, and C. A different line was shown to the subjects, and they had to match the newly introduced line to one of the original lines, A, B, or C. The participants were asked to say out loud which line correctly matched, but there were influencers called confederates within the trials.
A total of 18 trials were run in the Asch Conformity study. 12 of those rounds followed experimental models and were referred to as critical trials, and the other 6 were control trials. In his study, 50 male students participated, but some of them were confederates who were in on the experiment and gave wrong answers on purpose. While pretending to be normal participants, the confederates were trained to give an incorrect pre-selected answer to particular questions.
These trials began with the confederates answering correctly, but in time, they started answering incorrectly to allow the experimenters to see how the subjects' answers would change after the influence of peer pressure. In each experimental trial, 7 to 9 subjects would enter the room, but only one of them would be a genuine and legitimate member of the experiment. On the other hand, in the control group setting, only the experimenter was in the room, which meant that no confederates were present to influence the responses of participants. While Asch carried out his experiment, he kept in mind his overall purpose, to demonstrate the power of conformity in a group setting.
In the control group setting, less than 1% of participants gave the wrong answer. However, in the experimental group, 32% of participants conformed with the clearly incorrect confederate majority. Over the 12 critical trials, about 75% of participants conformed at least once, and 25% of participants never conformed. The Asch Conformity study has had long-term implications on the world of psychology, which has given it the title of being a fundamental experiment. For example, in 2010, experimenters Kazuo Mori and Miho Arai released a scientific journal that manipulated the Asch Conformity study by repeating the experiment without confederates. On the other hand, in 2014, a group of New Zealand researchers duplicated the experiment, but with robots instead of real human test subjects. The Asch Conformity study has demonstrated its long-term implications in the world of social psychology, which proves its title as a fundamental psychological experiment.